Very good, thank you. I'm very, very good. Nice to be chatting to you. How's life in Santa Monica?
Not too shabby, not too shabby. 72 and sunny, I think.
Oh, don't rub it in.
Andrew, where are you located?
I'm in London, so
Lovely.
it's all happening here today. There's news breaking, but it's the weather's not too bad at least. So I want to talk less about the parliamentary news and more about the weather.
Well, you guys have certainly had a lot happening with the monarchy and the government. So, we're keeping a watch.
It's crazy. Yeah, I love the poster behind you. Don't give up.
Yeah.
The ship, love it. Tell me more.
Yeah.
What's the thinking behind the ship?
Well, you know, around our office here, I've got some old flags that I've collected. So I have an old flag that flew on a Navy ship in World War II. I've got an old 48 star American flag. I've got another flag that flew over a ranger station in Yosemite that's like a California Republic flag. I don't know. There's just something very cool and authentic about the stories behind them. This one was on the back of a ship in Seattle. And when I thought about what my entrepreneurial mantra was, it was, don't give up the ship.
Man.
Um, we always just rallied through despite whatever obstacles were in front of us. So it's there for inspiration.
Well, you're an inspirational guest today, certainly on the Flow Labs, where our mission is to differentiate the human experience, but particularly around enabling learning, adaptability, and resilience.
Okay.
Yeah, it's perfect. We speak to people like yourself. We like to focus on the neuroscience of flow, mental wellness, and building peak performance through particularly tough times. So, the feast of the
Yep.
famine, of which I think you've certainly moved through. And I'm going to let you introduce yourself in terms of your background. You've certainly had several roles. Yeah, one of the which is, and your LinkedIn bio reads father, husband, founder on a mission
Yep.
to healthcare, telemed. I love all those different roles. If you're familiar with Marshall Goldsmith's Mojo, you certainly don't anchor yourself to a status role, i.e., CEO, and some of the material trappings that go with
No,
that, but you've got a very good spread of roles. Please
no,
tell
those
me
things,
more.
those things are fleeting, Andrew. I try and anchor myself to things a little bit more real.
Absolutely. I love that. Yeah. So, I mean, could you maybe walk us through perhaps some of your credentials, some of your path to date, which has included all sorts of interesting stuff? Investment analyst at Lehman Brothers, contributor to Forbes, and then you've actually always had a strong leaning towards healthcare. But I don't want to sort of crash your party. Please introduce us to your background.
Yeah, well, how much time do you have? I could talk about this for hours. So from my perspective, look, I grew up in Buffalo, New York, which was a very blue collar town, East Coast United States, and both my parents worked. I was working at a young age. I started working when I was 15. And I think that general work ethic has stuck with me for my entire life. I mean, I was literally working when none of my other friends were working. My first job was washing dishes. I think that once you do a job like washing dishes or digging ditches or whatever it might be, you realize that no job is beneath you,
Yep.
and that there's kind of a role for everybody. And I ended up working my way up from being a dishwasher to learning how to cook and
Ah,
becoming a saute cook when I was 17 years old and still a high school student, in an Italian restaurant called Rigoletto's in Buffalo. And then went to Cornell for undergrad, studied organizational behavior while I was there, waited tables to work my way through school. So I waited tables 4 nights a week. And, all of that has left me feeling very practical and pragmatic, but I've always been like a creative dreamer.
hmm,
I was never the math science guy growing up. I was always, history, English, creative writing,
yeah.
those types of things and storytelling. And so from that perspective, um, you know, post school, actually not post school, my senior year of school, I took a class with an entrepreneurship professor. His name was Professor David Ben Daniel. And he hooked me on entrepreneurship. He said, Jamey, the basic idea of entrepreneurship is you take an idea in your head, you make it real, and then you make it matter to people. And that really stuck with me. And like the second I wrote my first business plan, man,
Mhm.
I was hooked. I
Yeah.
was hooked.
All right.
It was the power of like, oh, I could actually build something that makes the world a better place, and that positively impacted people that people would want to use and leave that as a legacy, was really powerful to me. What I realized, and I grew up in the time of Enron, was that I didn't want a CFO to be able to pull the wool over my eyes, and I had a huge weakness in my skill set. I was like, I didn't understand finance. I never took accounting. And I just wanted to be more facile with those skills. And so I ended up going to work in an investment bank. And that was just an incredible training ground to learn about corporate storytelling. Any investor deck that you built was telling that company's story. Any financial model you built was telling that company's story in numbers. And I became a lot more detail oriented, and figuring out how you weave all of these things together into building a cohesive story that people want to be a part of. If you want to build a great company, you need to build a story that your employees want to be a part of, that your partners want to be a part of, that an investor wants to be a part of. And so honed that side of my career for 10 years, worked in investment banking and private equity, went back to business school, sat on the school's venture fund. That was Cornell as well. And then, so I spent 6 years in Ithaca, which is just this great, upstate creative little town in upstate New York. And then went to Lehman Brothers in New York City, did that for 3.5, 4 years in the communications and media group, worked on Google's IPO and follow on, the hostile defense of Six Flags, the amusement park company. But I had always come from a family of doctors, not my parents, but my sister's a doctor, my brother-in-law is a doctor, aunts and uncles on both sides were physicians. And so I started doing some consulting for my uncle, who's an ER doctor, who had worked on his practice for 15 years, built it up to 4 sites, staffing emergency room physicians throughout Los Angeles. And eventually he asked me to come and join the company. So I joined the company as the CEO, and over the next 8 years grew it from 12 million of revenue to 150 plus million of revenue, and founded another company called Cloudbreak Health with a gentleman named Andy Panos, who was my co-founder. And that company created the video medical interpreting market. So the first people to bring a language interpreter to the point of care for limited English proficient and deaf and hard of hearing patients. We built that company up into 2,000 hospitals across the country, into a real health equity solutions business, which is something that is really important in healthcare right now, is making sure everyone has equal access to inclusive care, no matter what type of person you are. And then merged that into a SPAC back in June of 21, and became president of the overall public company. And after doing that, decided that public company life wasn't exactly where I wanted to be. I really like the earlier stage of business. I'm a social impact entrepreneur. So I went to work with Startup Health as their chief platform officer, as an entrepreneur in residence, and I'm now responsible for the portfolio at Startup Health, which is probably the largest digital health ecosystem in the world. 400 companies have been invested in. Total enterprise value of the portfolio is over $27 billion. And it's centered across 14 different moonshots, which are all about solving the world's greatest health challenges. And it's an amazing team of people doing great work. And I'm really excited to be there. And that's where I am right now.
Wow, what an amazing intro. Thank you. And I mean, I want to come back to quite a few of things that you've mentioned. So you've gone from an interesting path, and there's so much we have, I guess, in some ways, in common. I really respect the fact that you were doing the humbling work at an early age, and certainly I can identify with that. My dad was a shopkeeper, a Greek entrepreneur. I was stacking shelves at the age of 12, waiting on tables, so he had a restaurant as well. So I think there's a lot there, particularly in how you're accessible now, given you're working with a 27 billion fund, 400 different companies, and 14 moonshots, as you've just reeled off. But you're still such a cool, lovely, accessible guy. Maybe that's the Californian sunshine and weather, but this is something that's quite rare. And I think particularly in tech companies nowadays, the stress of it, the long hours, it's kind of tricky to maintain that groundedness, to stay sort of human. And I guess that's possibly why you've moved into humanizing the health space. Now, there is a question.
That's right.
For me, the social impact element in what you've mentioned around particularly the health equity is something that we see not just in the US, but in Europe, in the UK especially, over the last 5 years, I've been involved in certain instances with the NHS, the National Health Service in the UK, and
Yep.
this is a system that has been up until recently excellent at administering very basic healthcare to the mass market. So they've been, you can't fault the way they've had the system working, but having said that, it's been at a very basic level. And so if you're looking to deviate from that baseline health offer, the system starts to become rickety. The doctors themselves are excellent in the system. The individuals are excellent, but again, it's managed by a system of bureaucracy, corporate dumbfuckery, and
I'm going to steal that word from you, by the way. I love dumbfucker. That's great.
Feel free. It's the second time I've used it in the last 48 hours, but it's we're surrounded by it, and and I think it's refreshing to speak to someone like yourself who is actually making a difference in that space. Can you tell us more about how you went from, particularly in terms of your latest venture, that going from you didn't quite go from 0 to 1. You went into the family business, and there was that in. But
Yep.
how have you managed to scale this large social impact venture so quickly through your platform? I mean, can you tell us through some of the learnings and some of that journey?
Yeah. Well, look, I think you mentioned a few things that I think are interesting to key on, right? Right now, we're really focused on healthcare innovation, and healthcare is going through a digital transformation. It's probably one of the last industries to do so. We've seen it in fitness, we've seen it in finance, we've seen it in retail. Everyone is using technology for the betterment of creating a better experience, except for healthcare until recently. And I think one of the issues is healthcare is typically a risk averse industry, right? Because the main excuse is, well, lives are on the line.
Yeah.
And so that holds us back. And in healthcare in particular, I think, Andrew, you realize this too, right? Like, all institutions have biology.
Yeah.
And the biology of any institution is to perpetuate that institution, whether we need it now or not.
Yeah.
And if you were going to build a brand new healthcare system from scratch, whether it's in the UK or the United States, the people aren't bad people. We have great people, amazing doctors, crazy good expertise, all those things that you said. But we have institutions that are holding us back. We have governments that aren't innovating quickly enough on actually new care models that incentivize the right behaviors, getting paid for what we do for patients in the United States instead of what we do to patients, right? There's a big differentiator there. So, look, in the United States, if we were going to build a new healthcare system and have a digital front door, we'd efficiently get people to the places where they need to be, and we would be matching cost to acuity throughout the system, and patients and providers alike would be having a great experience because there's no higher calling than taking care of other people.
Absolutely.
But if that's the case, why are physicians the number one burnt out workforce?
Yeah.
Right. Being asked to do more with less. And the number one symptom of that burnout is treating a patient more like an object instead of like a person. So it's ignoring the stories that make us human.
Yeah.
So we need to find a way. Like, I've spent my career as an entrepreneur finding ways for patients to be able to tell their stories and for providers to be able to take their hand in that story, right? And take ownership of that story. So I think that's a key part of it. And when we talk about social impact, look, for me, there's no industry that is more screwed up than healthcare. And so no greater place. If you take a look at healthcare, it's $4.3 trillion of GDP here in the United States. 20% of GDP we spend on healthcare. And a lot of that is just poor experience, poor efficiency, poor administration. And so if we can fix those things, everyone's lives here are going to be improved. Better access to care for everybody. You had mentioned really great basic levels of access, but having issues on the specialty care level as you try and navigate to higher levels of care. Those are all incredibly fixable things. And by the way, if you take a look at the adoption of technology during COVID, as an example, there was no new technology that came out that made telemedicine more accessible. It's not like there was a new holographic technology like we've seen in Star Wars that made it cool to use. We used the phone.
Yeah.
We used email. We used video. All these things that we had already been using for the past decade, because necessity was the mother of adoption instead of invention from that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So we have all the tools at our fingertips. We just need some conviction now to make the change happen.
Tell me about the funding behind this. So, in the UK, for instance, there's big pressure and backlog. You mentioned doctors are burnt out. Same here. I think they get on average 10 minutes per patient in terms of the time they can spend with them. And so rather than care for the patient, they're pushing through a workload that's unsustainable. Tell me about how we fund, or where do we start with some of these strategic forces that are pulling the system apart?
Well, look, I think one of the things that the UK has that the US doesn't is really a national healthcare system. I do believe that if you look at all of the countries in the world, they're really successful in providing healthcare. They have a national healthcare system. And that healthcare system provides a base, really good level of quality care. And then for people who can afford, another level of care, they get that level of care. I actually think that's okay, as long as the base level of care being offered to everyone else is of high quality.
Well, yeah, and you haven't stripped it of funding over the last 12 years. I mean, they've got into this process of austerity. They've swindled funds to other ventures, and the healthcare is suffering. So, sorry.
And a lot of that has to do with, I think, being transparent with how this money is being spent. And that's one of the things that healthcare, I'm not as familiar with the UK market as I am in the US. We have no price transparency here in the United States. Like, it's impossible to be a good consumer of healthcare. As people talk about like the consumerization of healthcare, it's a really difficult thing as a patient to be an educated consumer. Everyone reaches out to that member of the family who's a doctor or to an advisory service to basically go out and say, hey, I need to have this procedure. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Because it's impossible for them to consume the information themselves. So that's one of the things that really needs to be fixed as well.
And what about other players? I mean, we've got the likes of Walmart, and certainly some of my stakeholders, people listening to this, will be scale players, the likes of the Walmarts, the Krogers, retailers that are trying to go into the space. What are your thoughts on the impact that they can make? Are they actually moving the needle? Is this PR? Is this, what are your thoughts?
No, look, I think the market is changing rapidly. I think non-traditional players coming into the space with a different perspective and a different angle is exactly what healthcare needs. Like that external catalyst to say, wow, we really got to get with the times. We really need to change. There's some very exciting things about what Walmart is doing. I think Amazon, you never count Amazon out. And their acquisition of One Medical is certainly them saying we are planting a flag firmly in the healthcare space. It's and they own PillPack, right? A space they want to make better. There's great companies out there like GoodRx who completely upended the prescription business. I think all of those things are incredible from an advancement standpoint. Healthcare is typically an industry that changes from the inside out, which is why I think Amazon initially had some issues when, they had set up with, JP Morgan and Berkshire Hathaway. They had set up Maven, and they were all going to come together, and everyone was looking at that, and it was run by Atul Gawande, right? Like, you're like, okay, this company should work. I'm sorry, Haven. So that business, you're sitting there and looking at it like, wow, that should really be successful, and it wasn't. And it's just because there wasn't a level of understanding of the healthcare system that was really needed. And, if you're going to be changing clinical behavior, that really needs to be driven by physicians. Like the healthcare space is very evidence-based and evidence-driven, and people look at studies and say, well, this is what we should be doing and how we should practice. But the innovation catalyst coming from the outside, I'm very excited about that.
Yeah. I mean, we've even got people like Mark Cuban jumping in and making medicine more affordable. I don't know where he's at with that, but there was quite a lot of activity in the last 2 years around that.
Yeah, and he was actually an early investor in Startup Health. So, Startup Health, the company I work with now, is really on this mission to solve the world's greatest health challenges. And it's been around for 15 years. The founders, Steve Krein and Unity Stokes, are these incredible guys who have lived this mission and are now trying to take it to the next level. Having accomplished what they accomplished and building an ecosystem of 400 companies dedicated to solving not just healthcare challenges, but the world's greatest health challenges, and doing it in this moonshot model is something that's really unique. And it's something that is really, if you take a look at our perspective is that entrepreneurs can save the world, and that the founders who are in our portfolio are going to be the entrepreneurs who do exactly that.
I love that. Tell me more about this. So the model itself is, I don't know, imagine you were explaining this to, your grandmother. How has the model been put together from scratch? And what kind of entrepreneurs are you looking for? How do you recruit these people into your ecosystem? How do you retain them? Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, so we've been investing at a pretty fast pace. We invest in around 15 companies every quarter. We're looking to increase that. Um, they've invested in over, 400 companies so far. There's probably 300 plus that are still active in the portfolio, i.e., ones that haven't failed or ones that have exited, either through IPO or an M&A deal. And they're playing the long game. This to them isn't about a 5 or 10 year journey. It's about a 30-year journey,
Oh, wow.
which is a
That's
really
different.
fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice to be able to not be worried about next quarter, but to be worried about like the longitudinal impact that all these companies are going to have, over the course of a 30-year journey. Um, and
Look for to recruit these companies. Sorry to interrupt.
yeah,
What are the criteria?
so we are pre-seed, seed, and Series A investors. We have an academy that we put all of the companies through. So an educational curriculum, as well as real support services. So while we don't take large stakes in these companies, we want to be the most highly value added investor that they have.
Right.
The one that they can say, wow, I don't know what I could have done. If Startup Health wasn't there, we just couldn't have done it without them. Like we really want to be that integral to their journey, over time. So what we look for is we've got this pretty much down to a science. We've developed a scorecard, an investment scorecard, and the scorecard has to do with things like the health transformer themselves. That's what we call our entrepreneurs and founders. We call them health transformers. And so we very much look for certain things that are important to us in a health transformer. Do they have the right attitude and mindset? Are they batteries included? Do they bring energy to people or suck energy from people?
Love that.
All these different types of factors. Do they take care of themselves? One of the most, you talked about the grind before and how hard it is to be an entrepreneur. Are these people who set aside time to take care of themselves so they can better take care of others? All of those different factors we've got out in a 10 parameter scorecard. We rank the entrepreneurs on this, and then we do the same thing with their business, right? Do they have long-term goals? What is the general impact they want to have with this business? Do they want to build a company that is going to be a category leading company? All those different types of things. And also, are they in a niche that we think is really important that's going to move the needle? And so that's why we have the moonshots. We've just launched 3 new moonshots. One is Alzheimer's, another is diabetes. The last one is health equity. The previous ones were, obviously during COVID pandemic care, decreasing the cost of healthcare to zero is one of them. So democratizing healthcare, increasing access, that's important too. So we've got all these different moonshots and we organize the companies into them. Some companies are in multiple moonshots, but they are the North Star that guide these companies to the future.
Wow. I mean, I love it. I love what you're about. And for me, the world needs more of this, which probably begs the question, you mentioned earlier that your reach is global, but currently your focus, is it US? Is it global? Are you affecting impact or change elsewhere? How does that stack up for people
Yeah, so
in the US?
currently, it absolutely is a global mission. I would say 30% plus of the companies are global, located in, the UK, located in Africa. We actually have a number of companies in Africa, which is really cool to watch. So, companies in Canada, companies in Mexico, we're in 27 different countries right now. So that part of it is really exciting. And we just have a new Startup Health member who's based out of Spain. And she's going to be recruiting more companies from the EU and all those different types of things. So I think there's an exciting opportunity out there to continue to do this even more on a global basis than we are. But the mission is absolutely global.
Wonderful. And I guess I picked up that you were talking about the health of your doctors and your practitioners. Let's take this into a different gear. How do you look after your health? So someone who's actively involved in this, You're in California. Talk me through your discipline, routine. What is it that you do? And what are
God,
the
Andrew, it's funny that you say that because whenever I would fill out like Cloudbreak, which was the telehealth business that I ran, was a startup health company. So I grew, the last 5 years I spent in the portfolio before I joined the company as a team member. And whenever I filled out my health transformer scorecard, my weakest area was always healthy habits. Um, it's a challenge when you are building a business.
Yeah.
You've got young kids at home. Those are all things that pull of you. And the thing that I think that's worked well is actually scheduling time
Yeah.
because we live and die by our calendars.
Totally.
If it's not in my phone, I'm not doing it.
The time
So,
box. Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
right.
And what do
So
you
you
schedule?
actually need to block time to do it. And I schedule a half hour to an hour in the mornings where either I'm taking a walk, hopping on the bike. I do enjoy sports. So I try and get together with my friends. Like I always felt, Andrew, I don't know how you felt growing up, but I always felt that like running was a punishment, right? Oh, you missed that pass. Go run a lap, right? Like that was the
That was.
athletic the athletic environment I grew up in. So I never really enjoyed running like I feel like I should. I know so many people who just love running. Like it's
Yeah.
time for me. It's just me against myself. Like I get that, but I don't enjoy running. So I need to find like sports to play. So I used to play hockey 2 nights a week. I coach my son's soccer team 3 nights a week. So like, there's a lot of stuff there that I try and do to keep active.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I as a kid, I was actually quite a big kid. So I was very short and very wide. Growing up in a Greek supermarket, we
Yeah,
had sweets and stuff around, and I
lots of
get
baklava.
that's it at the age and good cooking, right? Proper
Yeah,
mum and grandmother's cooking, and I've just recently discovered running and yoga, and I think I'm probably healthier now than I've ever been because of education, because of
yeah.
a mindful awareness of, okay, if I have that chocolate, I'm not saying I don't eat stuff that isn't good for me, but I live in a world of debits and credits, right? So I know that when I have that slice of cake or croissant for breakfast, I've got to do a run or do a walk or keep that metabolism going. And it's not just physical, it's mental stuff too. The benefit of not just it's not just for calorie control. It's as you know, the burnout factor is high. For me, I build energy through exercise.
Yep.
I build resilience and sustainable sort of firepower. I feel better when I've gone for actually, you say running. I went for my run this morning. I feel just better.
It clears your head.
That's it. And it's a moving meditation. You could defrag the mind in a sense. So you can clear out
I
all
like
those.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, you clear out all those little niggling thoughts, the troubles,
I
it,
also think the more sedentary that we are, Andrew, like you just have this pent up energy that just kind of sits there, and you either exert that in stress or you can let it out through exercise, right?
absolutely.
Super, super positive thing. I also think the one thing that I've become very aware of is I think you and I have access to good role models. We have, the ability to go, run in an area that's safe. Like those are things that we like take for granted.
Yeah.
Access to good food, access to, yoga, whatever it might be. And there's a lot of people in the world that simply don't have that. I sit on the board of the American Heart Association here. And one of the big things that they're actually working on, while you think they would only be working on heart research, are actually what they call social determinants of health, right?
Mhm.
So these things that, do you live in a community that's a food desert? Or do you have access to really good organic, greens and things that you can make food with? Or is your go-to fast food?
Yeah.
What's carried in your supermarkets? They've started growing gardens in inner city neighborhoods so that they have access to these types of, food and can have it top of mind that what I put in my body is really important. So there's a big movement right now with underserved communities to raise the level of their social determinants so that, everyone again can have equal access to the things that we take for granted.
Secure food, as you say. People. We've got loads of food in the supermarkets, but if you live on some of that food, within a year or two, you'll be super unhealthy. I'm not saying all
Right.
of it, but there's even some of the trends of late. And I'm not knocking it. I'm speaking to plant-based players every day. There's some good ones, and then there's some not so good ones. I mean, Oreos are plant-based. So, and I'm not knocking Oreos, by the way. Like I said, credit, debit. If you can
Love a
work,
good Oreo every once
that's
in a
it.
while.
Uh,
Yeah.
we need to be more mindful of the stuff we take in. I love what you just mentioned before this. You mentioned that the role models in life. And I think, given that we're half an hour in, I'm going to leave that as the last question. But what are your role models? Who are they? Who have they been? In a world where we're sort of suffering from a vacuum of good leadership, particularly in politics, particularly in other areas of life, who would you look up to now?
It's such a tough question now, because most public figures, who you would normally say are amazing people, there's been some like dark side that's been exposed, or some aspect of them. So I like to almost pull different aspects of different role models together into one. I think my parents obviously were great role models, both worked growing up. So had that, work ethic instilled in me at a young age. I think this entrepreneurship professor, Professor Ben Daniel, taught me how to take my dreams and make them a reality. And that was a really powerful thing for me. There was the gentleman who I worked for in the restaurant, who owned the restaurant that I worked in, was incredibly inspiring to me and gave me opportunities to better myself. So I think when I look at over time, and I even look at people like Steve Jobs, who cut his own path, had ups, had downs in his career, had resiliency. I find him inspirational. I find parts of what Elon Musk has done as inspirational. There are very few entrepreneurs out there who have like put it all on the line the way that he has for every one of his businesses, and built category killing companies in fully entrenched industries.
Yeah.
Right. Finance, the space business, energy. These are normally businesses that take a huge amount of capital to go after, super intimidating to innovate in. And so you got to give him a lot of credit for that. So for me, it's about rolling all of that together, rolling the best of those people up into one role model that I continually am kind of looking to.
I love that. And what a great way to finish. Jamey, I've loved chatting to you. Man, I wish we could grab a beer. I'd carry on talking about this. Let's do that sometime. How about
anytime you are in Los Angeles, you let me know. I'm happy to get some good American Pilsner for you.
Awesome.
While you're here.
Awesome. Good. Well, that's a deal. And until then, I wish you all the best, and I thank you. I appreciate you, and the world appreciates you for what you're doing. Please carry on with the mission. If there's anything we can help, reach out. But thank you so much, Jamey. What an awesome chat.
Andrew, thank you for this opportunity. These discussions are important for us to have, and the dialogue is important for people to hear. So grateful for this opportunity. It's an honor to be on the show.
Awesome. Thank you, and be well.
All right, you too. Cheers.